In a world where money can buy everything except freedom, one woman's broken heart meets a man who believes nothing is truly impossible. When a 28-year-old billionaire in a wheelchair crosses paths with a humble 26-year-old mechanic, a single promise will rewrite both their destinies. A story of hope, courage, and love that conquers limits. If you love emotional and inspirational stories, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And now let's get started. The morning light broke over the skyline of New York City, casting gold reflections on the glass walls of towering skyscrapers. Inside one of them, Ava Collins sat silently near the window, her hands resting on the arms of her sleek, motorized wheelchair. At 28, she had everything people could dream of: wealth, fame, and a multi-billion-dollar tech company that bore her name. Yet behind the perfection, there was an emptiness that money couldn't fill. Her world had become small, confined not by her wheelchair, but by fear, regret, and a longing she refused to admit even to herself. It had been 3 years since the accident. A car crash on a stormy night had changed everything. Once known for her confidence and unstoppable energy, Ava now lived behind glass walls, avoiding the world that once admired her. Her assistants did everything: meetings, errands, even personal appearances. She stayed hidden, convincing herself that the outside world no longer needed her presence. Every morning she woke to the same sterile routine: reports, calls, silence. The hum of her wheelchair had replaced the sound of her high heels, and every echo reminded her of what she had lost. Her company still thrived, but Ava felt like a ghost watching her empire move without her. The screens and machines that filled her penthouse felt colder each day. She had invented devices that connected people across the world, yet she couldn't connect to anyone herself. The journalists called her the Queen of Innovation, but in truth she felt like a prisoner of her own success. Her heart ached not for luxury or recognition, but for freedom. She longed for the feeling of walking under sunlight, of being seen not as the billionaire in a wheelchair, but simply as Ava. That morning, something unexpected happened. She was on her way to a private investor meeting downtown, her assistant driving her van through the busy streets of Brooklyn. As they turned a corner, the vehicle jolted. A strange grinding sound filled the air, and then her wheelchair shuddered to a stop. "It's not moving," Ava muttered, pressing the control joystick again. Nothing. The power had gone out completely. Her assistant panicked, trying to call for the repair company, but traffic surrounded them. With frustration rising, Ava decided to step out of her bubble. "There's a workshop nearby," a passerby suggested. Reluctantly, Ava agreed. Her assistant pushed her down the wet sidewalk toward the small garage that stood between two old brick buildings. It wasn't the kind of place she'd ever been before. Oil stains on the pavement, the smell of gasoline in the air, and an old radio playing country music from the corner. Inside, sparks flew as a young man welded a piece of metal. He looked up, pushing his goggles to his forehead. He couldn't have been more than 26, tall and broad-shouldered, with sleeves rolled up and grease smudged across his arms. His eyes were blue and kind, not startled, not pitying. Ava expected the usual awkward silence, the kind that followed her wherever she went. But the young man smiled genuinely. "You've got yourself a stubborn machine, huh?" he said, walking closer. She blinked, surprised by his tone. It wasn't sympathy. It was friendly curiosity. "It's a chair," she replied dryly. "It just died." He crouched beside the wheels, inspecting them with careful hands. "Name's Ethan Walker," he said. "And don't worry, I fix broken things for a living." The way he said it made her chest tighten slightly. For a moment, she didn't feel like a billionaire, just a person being helped. Ethan started working right there in the garage, tools clinking softly against the metal frame. Ava watched him quietly. His movements were sure and patient, not rushed like the professional she was used to. The scent of oil and steel filled the air, strangely comforting. He asked her questions about the wheelchair, its model, power source, battery life, but not about her life or her company. He didn't seem to recognize her, or maybe he did and didn't care. She found herself answering his questions easily, something she hadn't done with a stranger in years. The conversation flowed, light and real. As rain began to fall outside, Ethan worked faster, determined to restore power to the chair before the storm grew heavier. He glanced up at her once, noticing the distant look in her eyes. "You know," he said softly, "machines stop working when they're overused without care. People too." Ava froze. No one talked to her like that. Not her board, not her doctors, not her so-called friends. She wanted to be offended, but his tone wasn't harsh. It was gentle, like he was speaking from experience. She looked away, her heart pounding quietly, unsure why his words mattered so much. Finally, with a spark and a faint hum, the wheelchair came back to life. The control light blinked green again. "There you go," Ethan said, stepping back with a grin. "Good as new." Ava tested it, moving slightly forward and back. "You really fixed it," she said, half impressed, half amazed. "Told you I could fix anything," he replied with a small shrug. When she offered to pay, he shook his head. "Just buy me coffee someday instead." She laughed, an unexpected sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. Something in that moment felt strangely alive. As she left the small garage, the rain easing outside, Ava found herself glancing back at Ethan. He was already busy with another repair, focused, humming to the radio. For reasons she couldn't explain, she wanted to stay longer. Maybe it was the simplicity of the place. Maybe it was the way he spoke without pretense. But deep down, she sensed that this ordinary mechanic had already begun to fix something far more complex than her chair, something inside her that had been broken for years. And though she didn't know it yet, that one encounter was about to change everything. The next morning, Ava found herself thinking about Ethan Walker. It was strange. People came and went from her life all the time, employees, partners, assistants, yet none of them had left an impression quite like him. Maybe it was the way he didn't treat her like someone fragile. Maybe it was the way his hands moved with purpose, or the quiet warmth in his voice. Whatever it was, it unsettled her. She told herself it was nothing. But when her wheelchair batteries started flickering again that week, she called his workshop instead of the official company line. Ethan answered immediately, recognizing her voice. "Ah, the stubborn chair again?" he teased, and she couldn't help smiling. "Maybe it just wants attention," she replied. "Bring it over," he said. "I'll make it feel loved." It was an odd thing to hear, but his light humor drew her in. When she arrived at his garage again, the place looked the same, messy but full of life. Music played, sunlight streamed through dusty windows, and Ethan greeted her with the same easy grin. For the first time in years, she felt comfortable somewhere that wasn't made of glass and steel. As Ethan worked, they talked. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about fixing cars with his father, who passed away when he was 16. He'd come to New York to chase a dream of opening his own workshop, but life hadn't made it easy. "Sometimes, the only thing that keeps me going is knowing I can make broken things work again," he said quietly. Ava listened, moved by his honesty. In return, she shared small fragments of her life, not as the billionaire everyone admired, but as a woman who missed the simple things she'd lost. They became unlikely friends. Ava began visiting the shop more often, sometimes with a broken device, sometimes with coffee, and sometimes with no reason at all. The city noise outside faded when they talked. Ethan never asked about her company or her money. Instead, he asked about her dreams. "You ever think of walking again?" he asked one afternoon, his voice gentle. Ava hesitated, her eyes dimming. "Every day," she admitted. "But my doctor said it's impossible. My spine's too damaged." Ethan didn't respond right away. He simply looked at her wheelchair thoughtfully, as though he didn't believe in impossible. That night, Ethan stayed late after she left. He studied the wheelchair's design, scribbling notes, taking measurements, and sketching ideas on an old blueprint pad. The concept that began forming in his mind was ambitious. A lightweight mechanical exoskeleton that could support Ava's legs, guided by sensors and controlled balance. It was something beyond his pay grade, but he couldn't stop himself. When she returned a few days later, he showed her the first rough sketch. "This could help you stand," he said. She stared at it, silent, torn between disbelief and hope. "That's not possible," she whispered. Yet, he corrected, weeks turned into months. Every night, after closing the shop, Ethan worked on the prototype. Ava began funding small materials without telling him it came from her own company. She wanted this to be their project, not a billionaire's purchase. They tested, failed, rebuilt, and laughed through exhaustion. There were days when the machine collapsed under its own weight, and nights when Ethan fell asleep at his workbench. Ava often brought him dinner and stayed beside him, learning, helping, and watching the man who refused to give up. Slowly, the boundaries between their worlds began to blur. During one of those long evenings, Ava found herself watching Ethan as
he adjusted the steel frame under dim light. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. He paused, setting down the wrench. "Because you deserve to stand again," he said simply. "Everyone deserves one miracle." She swallowed hard, emotions rising in her chest. For years, people had done things for her, out of obligation, profit, or pity. But Ethan did this out of pure belief. In his eyes, she wasn't a billionaire or a broken woman. She was someone worth saving, and that changed everything. They tested the first working model on a cold winter night. The exoskeleton trembled under her weight but held firm. "You built this," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We built this," he corrected, his hand steadying her shoulder. She stood for only a few seconds before the frame powered down, but those seconds felt eternal. Tears welled in her eyes. Ethan smiled, wiping a smudge of grease from his cheek. "Told you it's not impossible." Ava laughed through tears, the sound echoing through the quiet workshop. For the first time since her accident, she didn't feel trapped by her body. As weeks passed, they refined the design, improving stability and control. Ava's confidence grew with every test. Ethan watched her transform, from the quiet, distant woman he first met to someone who smiled without hesitation. One evening, after a successful trial, Ava looked at him and said, "You kept your promise." Ethan tilted his head. "What promise?" She smiled softly. "You said you could fix anything." He laughed, brushing back his hair. "Guess we're proving that true." Beneath the laughter, there was something unspoken, a warmth that had slowly grown into something deeper. But as the exoskeleton neared completion, Ava's reality caught up. The media began speculating about her frequent absences from corporate events. Investors grew impatient, and her assistant warned her that rumors were spreading. The world expected perfection from her, not vulnerability. Yet she couldn't walk away from what she and Ethan had built together. One night, as they stood side by side, looking at the nearly finished machine, Ava made a decision. "When I walk again," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "the world will know who made it possible." Ethan met her eyes and smiled. "Then let's make history." Spring arrived with the smell of fresh rain and blooming cherry trees across California's coastline. The final version of the exoskeleton stood shining under the soft lights of Ethan's workshop. Silver joints, smooth frames, and sensors ready to respond to her slightest movement. Ava sat quietly, staring at it like a dream she was afraid to touch. Months of effort, sleepless nights, and whispered promises had led to this moment. "It's ready," Ethan said softly. His voice was calm, but she could feel his heart racing beneath the surface. "It's time," she whispered, her eyes glistening with both hope and fear. He helped her into the suit carefully, tightening the straps around her legs, checking the sensors one last time. The hum of the power cells filled the quiet air. Ava's hands trembled as she gripped the handles for support. "You okay?" Ethan asked gently. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Scared," she admitted. "Good," he said with a reassuring smile. "Means it's real." She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the machine support her weight. For a moment, everything stood still. Then slowly, she began to rise. Metal joints clicked softly. Ava gasped as her body lifted upright for the first time in years. Her balance wavered, but Ethan stayed close, one hand ready to catch her if she fell. "You're standing," he whispered, his voice shaking with emotion. Tears streamed down her face as she looked down at her legs. "I'm standing," The words came out broken, full of disbelief. Her mind flashed through memories of hospitals, wheelchairs, and silent nights filled with hopelessness. Now all of that felt like another lifetime. Ethan smiled, his eyes bright with pride. "I told you miracles don't need magic, just belief." She laughed through tears, gripping his hand tightly. "Then you're my miracle," she whispered. The next few weeks became a series of small victories. Every day, Ava practiced walking. 1 step, then 2, then 5. The exoskeleton adjusted perfectly to her movements, becoming more natural with time. Ethan guided her patiently, celebrating every success and catching her every time she stumbled. Their bond deepened in the silence between trials, in the way they looked at each other when words failed. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was love growing quietly, unplanned but undeniable. Together, they had rebuilt something far greater than mobility. They had rebuilt trust, hope, and the courage to live again. Word of the invention began to spread. A journalist caught wind of Ethan's mysterious project for a high-profile client. Soon, major media outlets were calling, wanting to know if the rumors were true, that the reclusive billionaire Ava Collins was about to walk again. At first, Ava hesitated. She wasn't ready to face the world. But Ethan reminded her of what they'd promised each other. "This isn't just your story," he said gently. "It's hope for everyone who's ever been told they can't." His words struck deep. For the first time, she realized their invention wasn't just personal. It was universal. Ava's public appearance was scheduled at a coastal technology summit in Los Angeles. The entire industry buzzed with anticipation. Cameras, lights, and whispers filled the room as the crowd waited for her entrance. When she finally appeared on stage, still seated in her wheelchair, silence fell. She looked radiant, confident, calm, yet trembling inside. Ethan stood backstage, holding his breath. Then slowly she activated the exoskeleton beneath her dress. The audience gasped as the billionaire who hadn't stood in years began to rise, graceful and steady, supported by the machine they had built together. Flashlights burst across the hall like fireworks. Tears filled Ava's eyes as she took her first public steps. 3 years ago, I lost my ability to walk, she began, her voice breaking. But I met someone who reminded me that broken doesn't mean the end. It means a chance to rebuild. The audience listened in awe as she spoke not about wealth or success, but about resilience, innovation, and belief. "This is more than technology," she said, smiling at Ethan in the crowd. "This is what happens when compassion meets courage." The applause was thunderous. But all she saw was him, the man who made her dream real. After the event, journalists surrounded her. Investors offered millions, and companies begged to buy the design. But Ava refused. "This belongs to us," she said firmly to Ethan later that night. They sat on the pier, waves rolling beneath the moonlight. "To us, and to everyone who needs it." Ethan smiled quietly, knowing she meant every word. "You're still the boss, huh?" he teased. She laughed softly. "No," she replied, touching his hand. "You are the reason I can be one again." The ocean breeze carried their laughter into the night. Free, unguarded, and full of promise. Over time, Ava's project expanded into a foundation dedicated to mobility innovation. She and Ethan worked side by side, building affordable designs for people around the world. Their partnership turned into something deeper, more permanent. They moved to a small house near the California coast, part workshop, part home. Every morning, Ava walked along the shore using her exoskeleton, Ethan's hand always nearby. Sometimes they talked about the past, sometimes about the future, but mostly, they just smiled, knowing that fate had brought 2 broken souls together to make each other whole again. Years later, as the sun set across the Pacific, Ava stood watching the golden horizon. She could still feel the gentle vibration of the exoskeleton beneath her, steady and strong. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. "Still believe in miracles?" he whispered. She turned, her eyes soft with love. "I don't believe in miracles anymore," she said quietly. "I believe in people." He smiled, kissing her forehead. Together, they watched the waves crash against the rocks. A billionaire and a mechanic, proof that one promise made in kindness could truly change a life forever.